Star Wars, best place for below average Star Wars.
Hello there, and welcome to the Star Wars Show, a UK-based Star Wars podcast with in-depth discussions and analysis sprinkled with some silliness. I am the Geordie Jedi Pete.
And I am Star Wars Iain.
And we are back with a brand new episode of Star Wars. We are changing it up this week. This is going to be a deep dive review into the Star Wars novel Tarkin, written by James Luceno. This is something we've wanted to do for a while. I think everyone who's part of the podcast reads Star Wars, whether it's novels or comics or young reader books or, whether it's audiobooks, things like that. And sometimes we cover them week to week where we just sort of glaze over subtly what we've been reading that week. But this episode's solely focused on Star Wars Tarkin by James Luceno, so we can deep dive review it. Iain, obviously you have reread this recently. Are you excited to talk about Tarkin?
I am, yeah. It was really interesting. I think this is the second canon novel ever published, obviously under the new canon banner, and it came out way back in 2014, so it's 11 years old now. So which quite surprised me when I was obviously doing the research into this review. So yeah, no, I'm really excited to see what the canon looked like back then, and obviously how it holds up in canon now.
It certainly was an interesting time. Obviously, the Disney merger had happened. Disney had acquired Lucasfilm, and with it, Star Wars. And what they did was, after that acquisition, sort of all of the Star Wars material that had been produced outside of the movies, that was sort of written books-wise, was made legend, so it was no longer considered canon. But they did say everything going forward would be canon, and Del Rey were very excited with Tarkin. Their announcement was, in our second upcoming novel, created in collaboration with the Lucasfilm Story Group, best-selling Star Wars veteran James Luceno gives Tarkin the Darth Plagueis treatment, bringing a legendary character from A New Hope to full, fascinating life. So they were very excited. Again, it was sort of a bitter pill to swallow for a lot of fans when I suppose we weren't told that what was the EU was no longer real, but we just got told it was sort of going to be packaged in Legends, and obviously the story group's been able to pick and pull bits from it, and we'll continue to do that, which is cool. But obviously the Darth Plagueis novel, which was written by James Luceno, was obviously very well thought after, and obviously I think that was a bitter pill to swallow when fans got told that was maybe no longer 100% canon. But then we did get a nice dessert where it was like, but James Luceno, who gave us that, will be writing Tarkin, which again is sort of a big Star Wars character. When you consider how much little screen time he has throughout the whole Star Wars saga, he's a huge presence. What was your thoughts on it being James Luceno who got to write Tarkin?
Really excited because James Luceno is probably my favourite Star Wars author. Like Darth Plagueis, I've said on here many a time, is my favourite Star Wars book ever written. So and plus his back catalogue of Star Wars books is tremendous. You've got obviously Tarkin, you've got Rogue One Catalyst, which is a James Luceno novel, which is I think is one of the most underrated books in the canon. Rogue One Catalyst, because it came out before Rogue One, and I managed to read it before Rogue One came out, and it added so many more layers to characters like Galen, Lyra, Krennic, and it gave us like the backstory of how the Death Star was made and all that type of stuff, which does link into Tarkin. And obviously in Legends, you've got great books like Cloak of Deception, Darth Plagueis, and others that are really good. So yeah, he's probably my favourite Star Wars author of all time. So yeah, really excited, and yeah, it's quite interesting how he sprinkled some Legends into this book. But obviously, we'll get into that in the review.
We will indeed. So, as already mentioned, Tarkin is a canon novel written by James Luceno, which was published by Del Rey in November 4th, 2014. The novel is set 14 years before the Battle of Yavin, 5 years after the events of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. It obviously focuses on Wilhuff Tarkin and how he became a Grand Moff. It was also available as an audiobook, and it's been released in hardback, paperback, and it's also been included in sort of a collection of books titled The Rise of the Empire. Do you think that the character Tarkin was maybe chosen for the early canon books as a way to sort of pull in older fans. I think obviously we knew we were going to get a new Star Wars trilogy at this point, which was going to be sequels to the original trilogy. And obviously Tarkin's very much a huge part of that original trilogy, especially A New Hope. Do you think he's maybe chosen on purpose to try and bring fans in who enjoy that original trilogy and to give them a taste of the Imperial days?
Yeah, I think so, because the first canon novel was on New Dawn, which was focused on Hera and Kanan, who are new, obviously beloved characters now, but at that point were fairly new, and Star Wars Rebels, I think, was just starting. So yeah, I think you want to go with a big tentpole character. Also, he's not Vader, he's not Luke, he's not Leia, Han, Chewie, who obviously they would have had plans for. So yeah, you can do. Because obviously he dies in A New Hope. For anyone, I'm pretty sure anyone listening to this will know that, but spoiler alert if they don't. I'm pretty sure that they can use the Tarkin character, but it hasn't got wide implications for like story points, because obviously we know how his story ends. So yeah, I think it was a smart decision to use Tarkin, who's a fascinating character, and Peter Cushing, the actor, obviously who played Tarkin, is obviously a force of nature and well renowned. And yeah, so I think he's a great character in general. Yeah, even from the small screen time we get in A New Hope.
He certainly is. He sort of looms in that movie like he's a force to be reckoned with, even though he's not quite there. Similar to, I suppose, all the great Star Wars villains are. The Emperor, Vader.
Yeah.
There's times when in certain projects they're front and center, but like if you take Star Wars Rebels and Vader, he's very much in the background of those first, especially the second season. But his presence looms like very heavily, and I think that's something Star Wars is very good at. Sort of less is more, you could say, to quote the Undertaker there. Am I right in thinking that the novel starts off on Sentinel Base?
It does, yes. Yeah.
Do you want to just take us through, seeing as you've read it more recently than me, do you want to take us through what's happening at Sentinel Base?
So Sentinel Base is basically a staging area for the Death Star. It's there to protect the Death Star site, and it's used to ferry equipment, slave labor, all that type of thing through there. And yeah, that is where Tarkin. That's where the novel kicks off. Tarkin is at Sentinel Base, obviously overseeing the overseeing the groundwork of the Death Star and that type of thing. Because it's quite interesting. Because obviously he is quite a prominent figure within the Empire. People do wonder, because obviously they don't know about the Death Star at this point. People do wonder how has he lost favor with the Empire? Why is this key member of the Empire out at some unknown base in the middle of nowhere? Obviously, we know why, because he's obviously overseeing the Death Star. But yeah, there is quite a political rumbling through the book where thinking, why has he done that? And then obviously people start to become aware of the rumors that what the Empire is potentially developing out in the middle of nowhere in the Outer Rim. So yeah, that's where the story kicks off on Sentinel Base, and where the attack happens. Obviously, if you want to get into that,
We will indeed. We'll get into that. I think what's nice about sort of the beginning of the book is that it's very much Tarkin, as I said, sort of probably closer to the events of the prequel trilogy than the original trilogy at this point. And we do sort of get Grand Visor Mas Amedda sort of informing Tarkin that sort of Palpatine wants an audience with him on Coruscant. I think that was a nice tie to tie sort of the original and prequel trilogies together very subtly and very nicely done, and probably a fact on the Lucasfilm story group, I'd imagine.
yeah.
But yep, I think, am I right in thinking that does the attack happen straight away? I'm trying to remember back to when I read this book.
Yeah, it's pretty much Tarkin is. It's quite amusing. He's tailoring some of his Imperial outfits and figuring out what to do, and then the base comes under attack from an old Separatist cruiser. It comes under attack from droid starfighters, which is obviously quite interesting because we've seen we're 5 years removed from the Clone Wars, and the whole droid army is meant to be shut down. So that comes under attack. But it's quite interesting. There is a thing called the shadow feed, which obviously most Star Wars fans have heard of the HoloNet, which is, I think, basically the Star Wars version of like TV. And they're able, back during the Clone Wars, Count Dooku used this shadow feed to impart separatist propaganda within the holonet, so obviously people could see. Obviously, you get the Republic propaganda, then you get the Separatist propaganda. So there is another base apart from Sentinel Base, and the name escapes me off the top of my head. It comes under attack, quote unquote, but it's not really under attack. They've sliced into the holonet to look like this is under attack as a form of like a diversion to try and get to Sentinel Base. So yeah, that's really interesting. And then obviously they repelled that attack, and then it goes into a bit of an investigation piece of how they're able to slice the holonet and the darknet or not.
Awesome. I believe that station is Rampart Station, which is a very interesting name to choose.
It is now, yeah,
But,
with
yeah.
Admiral Rampart and the Bad Batch. Yeah, that's quite interesting. Yeah.
It is indeed. So we sort of have some events here, sort of in the present, I suppose, of the story. And then we also get sort of the making of Tarkin in sort of a flashback. We see Tarkin sort of reflecting on his childhood, on the Outer Rim world of Iradu. Obviously, his family were descendants of hunters, freelance pilots, and mining contractors who built Iridu's militas into a formidable sector military. What was your thoughts on sort of the background talking and sort of the look into his family in his younger life?
I really like this part because this is where we obviously get most of the character development. We see what made him a ruthless Imperial Moth, and he grows up on a planet called Iriadu, and this planet is wild. It's unkempt, but the Tarkins have settled this planet for generations, and it's quite a violent planet. Obviously, you have your civilization, you have your cities on this planet, but you also have the Carrion Plateau and the Carrion Spike, which is a wild area of the planet where generations of Tarkins have gone to hone their skills in hunting, tracking, and tracking down the planet's apex predators. So yeah, this is a really interesting thing because it starts off Tarkin, obviously gets sent there, and he spends summer after summer going to this place with his uncle Jova, and that teaches him the skills needed to obviously become a Tarkin and rule the planet of Eriadu. So yeah, that was that's one of my favourite parts of the book. Like, we get a lot of background detail into Tarkin and why he is obviously how he is.
And speaking of Carrion Spike, he does, of course, name his own personal ship, the Carrion Spike, I believe, in homage.
He is. He does, yeah.
So, Coruscant obviously arrives at the Imperial Palace. He's greeted by Grand Visor Amida and also Rear Admiral Mills Tennant. Obviously, they've got a bit of a backstory from when they were younger in the Imperial Navy. We have sort of some interactions here. I don't know if you want to talk about those, sort of when they're talking about. I think some dials back to like the Clone Wars and things like that.
Yeah, to go back to their days in the obviously Republic Navy and that type of stuff, and he's the one who obviously asks Tarkin about the Death Star. But obviously they go to the Imperial Palace, which is obviously forming the Jedi Temple. This is where obviously Palpatine is taking up residence. Obviously is a bit of a like my game with the Jedi, obviously taking up residence in their former home and obviously using it as a trophy. So yeah, they're walking through the old Jedi Temple, now the Imperial Palace, and he asks him about the Death Star and that type of thing. And Tarkin is very much like, why you should be talking about stuff like that out in the open. So yeah, it's quite a well-known secret in parts of the Imperial Navy about the Death Star. So yeah, Mills Tennant is obviously his pal from the old Republic days.
And Mas Amida does bring Tarkin for a private audience with Darth Vader in the lower levels of the Jedi Temple.
He does, yeah. They go down to the lower levels of the Jedi Temple, obviously, and we see Vader interrogating, well, back of a letter word, some criminal syndicate members and through stuff like that. I think it's the Crymora. I think he's interrogating. And yeah, then we get to see a bit of play a bit of interaction between Tarkin and Vader, and it's quite interesting because Tarkin has figured out at this point that Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker. He doesn't know for sure, but he's pretty confident that the guy behind the mask is Anakin Skywalker, just through how he interacts with his troops, how he carries himself. Yeah, he's pretty confident at this point that Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker. He doesn't share that opinion, so I don't think Vader would appreciate it. But he obviously in his own head he is very confident that that is the case.
I love that because it's like he figures that out, but it's like, what does it matter to anybody else? Like, to him to then call a mannequin or to tell people, like, would just be career suicide, I suppose. And I think he knows that. So it's like, it also doesn't affect his day-to-day life. I think, like, the Empire's in control. It's the Emperor, and then it's Vader, and like that's what it is. So regardless of what I know about him or his past, like it doesn't, like, it's good to know, I suppose, in the back of your mind to understand him maybe a bit better, but to share that wouldn't get you anywhere, which I thought was really, really cool how he keeps that to himself. It would just hurt him and hurt the Empire, I suppose, if he started leaking things like that. Tarkin then attends a meeting with the ruling council, which is other high-ranking Imperial officials. That includes the Emperor, Darth Vader, Mos Amata, the ISB is obviously there as well. Colonel Willof Yellerin's also there. I don't know if you can talk us through just this briefly.
Yeah, the Imperial ruling council basically is Palpatine who sits at the top, obviously, and you've got Darth Vader who is not really in the ruling council, but he's obviously adjacent to it. He doesn't really have a formal rank within the Empire. He's just obviously, as we know him, he's obviously Darth Sidious, his Sith apprentice. And then it's made up of different areas of the Imperial hierarchy. You've got ISB, you've got other areas of it, and they're there to really make the day-to-day running of the Empire work. Palpatine's more of a figurehead. He's obviously got his own stuff going on, trying to learn the secrets of the dark side and all that type of thing. So he has trusted advisors. Some of we've seen, people like Yup Tashu and other Yularen, all that type of stuff that make the decisions. Obviously, they are accountable to the Emperor, but at this point, I think he's very much like you can run the nuts and bolts of the Empire as long as you don't screw it up, basically.
Indeed. Obviously, following the briefing, the Emperor instructs Vader to accompany Tarkin to Murkana to investigate the communications cache in order to sidestep the Imperial bureaucracy. So after being briefed about the mission, Tarkin makes arrangements to delay his return to Sentinel Base. He sends back most of his crew, apart from the Carrion Spike's captain and communications officer. In a flashback scene, Tarkin reflects on leaving the Judicial Department and working with Senator Palpatine to engineer former Chancellor Valorum's downfall. What are your thoughts on this tie back to sort of Chancellor Valorum and sort of a time sort of around the Phantom Menace time, I suppose?
Yeah, this reminds me of the old Legends books like Cloak of Deception and other areas like this where we obviously see Palpatine. This is when he's genial Sheev Palpatine, obviously making connections. Obviously, we all know his master plan in the end. But like that, he uses, obviously, Tarkin. He obviously sees Tarkin as a valuable asset to his, obviously, Empire, and then he starts forming a relationship with the man. He obviously encourages him to go into politics. He says he's wasting the Republic Judicial. For those who don't know, the Republic Judicial is basically the Republic peacekeeping force, that type of thing. So yeah, he was in the Republic Judicial Department, and so Palpatine starts to obviously try and prod him towards going towards politics and helping out. And it's quite interesting as well because Palpatine uses Dooku, I think, as kind of a loyalty test. He tries to get Dooku to recruit Palpatine tries to get Dooku to recruit Tarkin to the Separatist Alliance because Iriadu is quite in an exposed area of space when it comes to the Separatists. It's quite close to Separatist space, and then we see a bit of a courtship of Dooku trying to get him to join the Separatists, and then obviously he won't do it. He remains loyal to Palpatine, so I think that gives Palpatine everything he needs to know about the man. So yeah, it's quite interesting how obviously Palpatine uses Dooku as a conduit to see if Tarkin will remain loyal to him, and he does. So that is quite an interesting part of the story as well. Very Cloak and Dagger, very pre-Phantom Menace type of vibe, which I enjoy. Which I really enjoy that part of the Legends timeline. So yeah, it was good to see that brought back in at this point.
Definitely. So he sort of uses Tarkin to help him, plot the downfall of Valorum.
Yeah.
He knows that Tarkin turns down Count Dooku and the Separatists, which is very cool. And then, obviously, during the Clone Wars, he does very much try to bring Tarkin and Anakin or Vader together during the Clone Wars as well for a few things. Sort of building this relationship and building the blocks to what's going to be this here now, where obviously Vader is now traveling with Tarkin on the carrion spike to do this mission. Cool little fact is that one of the stormtroopers in Vader's contingent of stormtroopers is a surviving clone. So there's not many of those left in the service at this point, I don't think. So that's quite an interesting fact. I don't know what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, it was a cool time. I think at this point we had no Bad Batch, we had no like Rebels and all that type of thing, so we weren't really aware of what happened to the clones in the canon. Obviously, we now know that they were obviously phased out and decommissioned. But yeah, it's quite interesting. You think that obviously we see in the Bad Batch, like just after Revenge of the Sith, that there are young clones and they're not just gonna like not use them. The Empire will very much use them until they obviously their accelerated growth takes over and then they're deemed not useful anymore. So yeah, it does make sense that there will be still some clones in service 5 years after the Revenge of the Sith and the Clone Wars.
Obviously, on this mission to Mercana, we sort of learn that it's a bit of a setup. There's been some assets left, easy to find, and it's almost a bit of a setup that leads to the stealing of the carrion spike. I don't know if you want to talk a bit about this.
Yeah, so Vader and Tarkin are called away to the planet Mercana, which for any Legends fans out there plays a prominent role in another James Luceno book, which was the rise and fall of Darth Vader. It's set just after Revenge of the Sith, and Darth Vader goes to Mercana to hunt down a Jedi and hunt down separatist co-conspirators. So there is quite a few lines in here that are tied to that book, which is good. I always like that, using new stories to bring in old stories. I think that's where Star Wars is at its best, and I do think the old EU has value in that. So yeah, I think it's good that we did that. So yeah, they're brought away to the planet Mercana. They find a separatist cache of technology that is used, obviously hook into the shadow net but Tarkin and Vader start thinking this is a bit too on the nose, like what's happening here. And then that's where obviously it's used as a distraction so that former Republic and Separatist intelligence officers and operatives use this moment to steal the carrion spike, which for those of you who are not aware, the carrion spike is a prototype stealth ship that has a cloaking device, is it's a very, very powerful ship. And for those who've watched Clone Wars, we actually see a version of this ship in the Christophsis arc, where Anakin pilots the type of thing, and obviously the destroyer Admiral Trench's flagship above Christophsis, allowing them to break the blockade. So we have seen it on screen, this type of ship before, and yeah, Tarkin obviously has one as his personal corvette, and yeah, it's quite a nightmare if it gets stolen because it can cloak. It's got a really powerful hyperdrive, and yeah, it falls into the hands of old Republic intelligence officers and separatist officers who obviously have a grind with the Empire now.
It is indeed, and it leads to sort of a hunt for the carrion spike. What's your thoughts on sort of Vader and Tarkin coming together to sort of hunt for the carrion spike? Obviously, Vader does some killing. Certainly with the Suki crime lord and his henchmen. And it does lead to sort of Palpatine learns about this and the theft of the carrion spike on Coruscant as well, which is very interesting.
I think it's really good because we obviously start to see the relationship. We see in New Hope that Tarkin is very much, I'd never like to say in control of Vader, but very much Vader is aware that he answers to Tarkin on the Death Star, and it's very good to see the beginnings of those relationships it's the same as when we see Vader work with Thrawn in his canon trilogy, and see that relationship develop. So yeah, it's quite interesting to see. I think because at first they're not. Vader's got history with Tarkin. He's not very happy. Obviously, back when his Jedi days, Tarkin accused his apprentice Ahsoka Tano of treason, and it wasn't her. So yeah, I don't think he was too best pleased with Tarkin. But obviously, that's Anakin Skywalker. So yeah, they do have issues to work through, but we do start to see them work together. And I very much think Vader obviously respects Tarkin. Going off onto another story, we have a comic in the Darth Vader run where it's a point where Darth Vader uh, has hunted all the Jedi. He can't find any more, and I think he's a bit bored, and he asks Tarkin to hunt him on a planet. If anyone who's read that issue, it's really good. I think it's Darth Vader 18 of the Charles Soule run, I believe. Anyone who obviously listens to this and wants more Tarkin and Vader, I would highly recommend that because it's really good. It would work for me as a Star Wars movie, as a bit of a horror film, because it's quite spooky at times with Vader hunting Tarkin and his party. So yeah, this whole novel builds on that and their relationship.
It's interesting you brought Ahsoka Tano up because I think, again, that's probably a puzzle piece of Palpatine's. He puts Tarkin in play. He accuses Ahsoka of treason. Obviously, Ahsoka's found not guilty, but Ahsoka leaves anyway. But without Ahsoka leaving, Anakin probably doesn't turn to the dark side, you could argue. So it's a vital piece in that puzzle of turning Anakin. And obviously, Tarkin plays his part in that strategy on behalf of Palpatine. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, obviously Palpatine, the master manipulator, he's just chipping away at Anakin in the Clone Wars. He's using different things. He puts. Obviously, we see the Clone Wars arc where Obi-Wan Kenobi quote unquote dies, and the fact that, to be fair to Palpatine, he doesn't really have to manipulate Anakin that much because the Jedi don't do a great job of keeping him on side. If we're looking back now, I mean, brutally honest, they don't really do a good job of keeping him on side, which is quite funny. But yeah, there is a little part of that in the Clone Wars. Obviously, Kenobi dying, and then obviously finding out that he didn't really die, but they didn't trust him with the fact that he wasn't dead, and then obviously Ahsoka leaving the Order and all that type of stuff. So yeah, the story of Anakin Skywalker was tragic because I truly believe if Qui-Gon Jinn wasn't killed on Naboo, I don't think he turns. Like eventually, I think he's the Jedi that he needed to train him. If you know what I mean. So yeah, it's very interesting. Obviously, we see that's another little knock on the armor of Anakin Skywalker in his eventual downfall to obviously becoming Darth Vader.
No, it is indeed. Okay, where are we up to after that sidetrack?
We were up to the carrier spike being stolen, yeah, and then going on a bit of a rampage.
Yep, and then back in Coruscant, the ruling council's briefed about the hijacked carrier spike. Heeding Tarkin's warnings, sort of advocate for preparing Imperial bases in the Outer Rim for a campaign of destruction. The council learns that the shipjackers have attacked Tag Corps mining operations, and obviously using the carrier spike to transmit holovids of their attacks. Obviously, Vader is very much sort of now going to be on the hunt, I think. But they do learn something cool, is that the carrying spike has unique fuel requirements. So Tarkin speculates that the ship would travel to either Gromas in the Perkel sector or Findor in the Mandalore sector. So they sort of know where the ship needs to go to refuel, which is pretty cool. And then there is sort of a debacle on Findor. I don't know if you want to talk us through the Findor system and what happens when the Star Destroyer Liberator turns up.
Yeah, basically they blow up the refueling station, which they're not best pleased at. They're trying to lay a trap for the carrier spike to obviously capture it, and then the crew get kind of wise that something's up. So yeah, no, they blow up the refueling station. Tarkin and Vader blow up the refueling station, and obviously it's not the best because, like you said, it's quite specialized fuel display, so it's not like any refueling station in the galaxy. So yeah, I don't think the Emperor was probably best pleased with that.
No, definitely not. And sort of Tarkin and Vader deduce that their enemy is well acquainted with Imperial procedure, Obviously, there's a dogfight that happens, but the carrying spike does escape into hyperspace. I think off the background of that, we have sort of on Coruscant, the Emperor's convinced to deploy sort of interdictor vessels against the hijack carrying spike. Umeda informs the Emperor that the cache of communication jammers was discovered on Makana by an ISB asset tasked with investigating the find by his case officer. The Emperor summons the ISB agent and is handed for a meeting. And sort of the sort of two things. One is the sort of the political investigation bit and the information happening on Coruscant, and then there's like Vader and Tarkin out in the field looking to like sort things out. Obviously, it does lead to, I believe, the capture of a Kurovar captain, he's captain of a surviving freighter, and sort of Vader questions them, and Tarkin continues to search for the carrying spike. I don't know what your thoughts are on that and sort of the ending of that part of the book.
Yeah, Tarkin and Vader obviously figure out that the captain of this ship has been in league with the carrying spike and helped them obviously escape. The interdictor scene is quite interesting. They think that the carrying spike's going to come out of hyperspace and it doesn't, and they end up pulling a bunch of ships out of hyperspace that they shouldn't have done. And they can't find the carrying spike, and a lot of people either die or that don't need to die. Obviously, I think it's the first canon reference of an interdictor cruiser, which obviously we see later on in Rebels. It's quite an interesting little scene, and the carrying spike at this point just manages to stay one step ahead of Tarkin and Vader, which obviously doesn't go down well with both of them. And it's starting to get to the point where they're worrying that the carrying spike will move further inward towards the core. And that's, I think, the Empire wants... The Empire doesn't really care about the Outer Rim, seldomly cares about the Mid Rim, but they need the core worlds to stay on side to obviously keep the Empire going, because the core worlds is basically the cities of the galaxy. So they need them to stay on side so they can, people can go, well, the Empire is great, nothing happens on the core, if you know what I mean, that type of stuff.
Definitely. And sort of now on the Star Destroyer Executrix, Tarkin deduces that the shipjackers are being aided by Imperial assets with high clearance. Vader also interrogates the other crew from the ship and learns that the fuel cells had been procured through a human broker called Knots. Obviously, delivering the classified Imperial files, Tarkin discovers that Knots had been a Republic intelligence subcontractor stationed on Antar 4 during the Clone Wars. Following the establishment of the Empire, Tarkin had presided over the Antar atrocity, which had seen the arrests, executions, and massacres of many Kurovar and Gota loyalists. Tarkin's actions had generated much criticism in the Imperial media, including 2 Coruscanti journalists. He also determines that Knots was connected to Captain Birch Teller, a descendant Republic intelligence officer who opposed the Antar atrocity. Tarkin also learns that Teller was briefly stationed at the Desolation Station, the outpost responsible for overseeing much of the Death Star's research before disappearing. So basically, it's an inside job, it seems like, and also people on the outside who probably have a lot of reasons to hate Tarkin for what he's done to sort of their society. What's your thoughts on sort of all that coming together here?
He's got a fair few massacres in his atrocities in his play, but we're obviously seeing the Gorman one, which we obviously didn't see in Andor, but we obviously heard that he landed a ship on people. We've got the Antar 4 massacre and that type of stuff, and at this point as well, I'm pretty sure that they would have started to work towards obviously the elimination of the Geonosian people. So he's got a fair few atrocities in his book. It makes sense because not everyone in the Republic is going to be all of a sudden, oh well, the Empire's great. It makes sense that. I think the story of Teller is a lot of his intelligence agents were killed or that type of stuff. So it does make a lot of sense that he would be more than annoyed with Tarkin and wants to seek retribution. for obviously the people he's lost and how he feels.
No, it certainly is. After this, sort of the Vader tracks down the carrying spike, and has it scanned for life forms, and I believe they find it empty. Again, more part of this sort of this plan of espionage. What was your thoughts on sort of on Vader tracking down the carrying spike? Obviously, they do nearly destroy it, but luckily they don't. They don't attack the scan it, and there's no life forms on.
Yeah, it's obviously typical Vader. He tracks it down. He's managed to obviously find it, and yeah, I think it makes total sense. Like, obviously, we've seen him many a time over the years track stuff down, and yeah, it's lucky. Speaking of the carrying spike actually survives all the way up to just before the Force Awakens. It is left in a like a repair bay. I don't know if it's left in a repair bay off the back of this. I'm not quite sure, to be fair, but it's left in a repair bay, and the First Order intelligence officer Terex finds it and uses it as his flagship. So the carrying spike does survive all the way up until just before the Force Awakens, where eventually it is destroyed because Terex pushes the First Order too far and they get annoyed with him. So yeah, no, it's quite interesting that this ship is seen well into the sequel trilogy area because it is a really cool ship. So yeah, no, I enjoyed that part of the book.
Indeed. So next up, we have sort of the neutralizing the insurgents. So sort of Tarkin is obviously on the Star Destroyer Executrix. Executrix bombards the enemy capital ships. There's obviously starfighters to protect the convoys. And obviously the tables turn sort of on these insurgents who have been, have had one foot in front of Vader and Tarkin and the Empire, sort of all book, but it starts to turn here. Obviously, while this is all going on, Darth Sidious meditates on his quest for galactic dominance, and Tarkin greets his captives. So he does capture Knots and the two journalists, as mentioned before. What's your thoughts on sort of on this? On the success of Tarkin's hunt, and then of course on Palpatine just sort of meditating on it.
Yeah, the interesting with Palpatine is under the Jedi Temple there is a Sith shrine. Obviously, we see this in the book, and obviously Palpatine goes down underneath the Jedi Temple to use this to obviously meditate and do other spooky dark side stuff, I'm sure. And yeah, that's quite interesting. Another interesting thing, just tying back to James Luceno, which I really did enjoy, is he brings in the droid 114D into canon. And 114D, for anyone who doesn't know, was Darth Plagueis' personal droid that he acquires at the beginning of the Darth Plagueis novel and is with him for his whole life. He's a medical droid. He's a analytical droid. So yeah, it was quite cool to see that 114D is now serving Palpatine. It's obviously a direct tie back to his master Darth Plagueis. That's something I really did enjoy because that's a great droid character that we obviously learn a lot more about in the Darth Plagueis novel. In terms of Tarkin, yeah, there probably wasn't really any doubt that eventually he would successfully track down the insurgents and bring an end to their propaganda that they've been broadcasting on the obviously on the holonet. Basically, the whole Teller knows that. I think Teller knows about the Death Star, like you said. He was at Desolation Station. That obviously gives you information. Their whole goal is to bring the Death Star to light to the wider galaxy. Obviously, they fail at this point, and this obviously just demonstrates that Tarkin is a strategic genius, and that he has an unwavering loyalty to the Empire, and that obviously helps him his ascent to the next rank that he will get to, obviously, at the conclusion of this book.
Yeah, so obviously the book sort of ends with sort of Tarkin, the conductor sort of a heavy investigation, interrogating the captured conspirators and collaborators, who of course in typical Empire and Tarkin fashion end up executed in secret. In a meeting with Vader and the Emperor, Tarkin explains that Rancid, who was of course on this ruling council, was motivated by the perceived slight that he had been stripped of his command of Sentinel Base for objecting to the Empire's actions on Antor 4. Tarkin credits Rancid with supplying intelligence and materials to the Descendants. Vader also informs them that the Empire has punished the warehouse workers, salvagers, and the scientists at Desolation Station who aided the Descendants. So again, very much Nazi rule going on here. The Descendants Bomber Separatist warship was also assembled at shipyards in the Bajik sector, jointly owned and operated by the Tenlos Syndicate and the Kimura Syndicate. So yeah, despite finding Tellar's headhunter on Christophsis, they were unable to find any trace of the man. Obviously, in the wake of Rancid's treason, the Emperor orders a reshuffle of the ruling council and the incorporation of naval intelligence into military intelligence. The Emperor also tasks Tarkin with tightening the Empire's hold over the Outer Rim and promotes him to the rank of Grand Moff. Grand Moff Tarkin is placed in charge of the entire Outer Rim and the Death Star project. In the wake of his promotion, Tarkin gives lengthy interviews to the media, which coin his statements as the Tarkin Doctrine. Tarkin also takes steps to clamp down on dissent and perceive the secrecy of the Death Star project. Weeks later, Tarkin returns to the Spike on Araru, where he reunites with his uncle Jova. Intent on revenge, Burt Teller tracks Tarkin down, but fails into an improvised pit trap. Tarkin confronts his nemesis, who is nursing a broken ankle. Tarkin refuses to divulge details about the Death Star project, but offers to let Teller go if he can climb out of the pit before nightfall. Teller rejects Tarkin's offer, and the younger Tarkin leaves his uncle to watch over Teller should he cause trouble. Later, above the secluded world Geonosis, Tarkin watches over the construction of the Death Star. So I don't know what your thoughts are on sort of on the ending of the book. Sort of it brings together nicely, sort of Tarkin as Grand Moff, Tarkin ruling over the Outer Rim, the Death Star project in full swing and still in secret, and sort of status quo sort of returned back to how it should be for the Empire.
Yeah, I agree. It's quite a seminal moment in the Empire. This is the point where the Empire really does dig into the Tarkin Doctrine, which people don't know. The Tarkin Doctrine, obviously created by Grand Moff Tarkin, promotes basically rule by fear of Force rather than Force itself. So he's very much the thought of the Imperial retribution is worse than the actual Imperial retribution. People think, oh, we don't really want to do that because we don't want the Empire obviously clamping down on us. Which obviously the biggest piece of that doctrine is the Death Star. If you know the Empire out there has a weapon that is able to destroy planets, you're very much more likely to fall in line. Because just through overall Roman fears, that is quite interesting that they go all in with the Tarkin Doctrine, and that is obviously quite seminal, which we see backfire in the Empire eventually because they do destroy Alderaan, which obviously is more of a rallying cry to the Empire, to the Rebel Alliance than I think they intended. So yeah, it's really interesting. Obviously, Tarkin gets oversight of the Death Star project. Obviously, the Death Star project at this point is still secret, but he does get oversight of that. And yeah, he believes that the super weapon will be obviously the ultimate piece of the Tarkin Doctrine. So yeah, that is pretty much how the book ends, and that is where we find ourselves at the end of the book. Yeah,
it is indeed. Obviously, Vader just sort of vanishes into the night after his parts of the story have concluded, which sort of makes sense. You know, the book's not about him; he's just a prominent character because he's there at this time, and obviously, it's quite an important mission. So the Emperor does pair Tarkin with Vader, but he doesn't overstay his welcome, which I thought was very cool. Part of me thinks, you think about Palpatine's master plan, a lot of people pour a lot of hot sauce in how good Palpatine is. I'm not saying Palpatine set this up, but the events of this book do allow him to make Tarkin the Grand Moff and do allow him to sort of give him control. I mean, he could have done it anyway, I suppose, because he can do what he wants, but have you got any thoughts on how again Palpatine uses the events that are happening around him to move the pieces he needs where he needs them?
the man is a master manipulator. However, I do think he has a great degree of luck in certain things, and he's very good at pivoting plans. He's got plans upon plans upon plans. He's got a plan for this plan, a plan for that plan, a plan for that plan. Yeah, I think there was a great degree of luck, even though Obi-Wan Kenobi doesn't believe in luck. But I do think he's very good at thinking on his feet, and obviously he's always one step ahead. Like in the Bad Batch episode where they think they've exposed the destruction of Kamino, and then he uses it to implement his stormtrooper program. The man, like, he's a genius, really, is he? Really, like, he's awful and evil and horrendous, but he doesn't let any situation go to waste.
No, definitely. It's almost like he has these awful plans in place, ready to go, and he waits for the certain stumbling blocks to fall, and then he executes them. Like the plans, I mean,
Yeah.
he executes people as well. Like, don't get us wrong, but yeah. Interesting fact for you, and I don't know if you would be interested in this book, but James Luceno was quoted as saying that he was actually trying to interest Lucasfilm in a novel about the Emperor set between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. And then that was when the newly installed story group asked if he would be interested in writing a novel focusing on Tarkin. So obviously, great that he was in contact with Lucasfilm. And James Luceno obviously loves Star Wars, and he's trying to write new Star Wars, which is cool. Obviously, great that he got to do Tarkin, but like, would you love a James Luceno Palpatine book set between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back?
I would kill for that novel. It would be great. It would be absolutely. He writes dark side characters, like I said, Darth Plagueis or Darth Vader, whatever he's taken up. I would kill for that book. Absolutely, it would be amazing.
It'll be a great time because obviously the Emperor's mentioned like in A New Hope, obviously like very briefly. Again, less is more. Doesn't need to be there, but and then obviously in Empire Strikes Back, like we see him and hear him when Vader contacts him. And he's very much Vader's on the hunt for Luke on the on the not on the orders of Vader, not on the orders of Palpatine, but Palpatine's very much happy for him to do that. If that makes sense. So it would be cool to see, because that book would probably deal with like Vader coming to the Emperor to say, "Look, I've encountered a Virgins in the Force. He's destroyed the Death Star. I've also learned that he is Luke Skywalker. So he's my son, or Anakin's son. And obviously, whether the Emperor would be like, scared of that fact straight away, and obviously learn that we'll have to deal with him. We can't let him run wild. So we need to either kill him or turn him, I'm assuming. So it'll be very, very interesting. But yeah, overall thoughts. Why should somebody read this book, and why did you love it? I suppose
Someone should read this book because it's a great one-off story. It tells you quite a lot of the background of one of the most important characters in the Empire. It's quite a quick read as well. But yeah, no, it's a good adventure. It's a great adventure team with a great character retrospect. And yeah, I think anyone who obviously likes James Luceno, who's obviously read the Legends novels and that, I think it's quite good. You'll enjoy this book because it is quite it's got quite a Legends feel, but obviously in the canon. So yeah, no, a really good read. Like I said, way back in 2014 when this first came out, I would obviously highly recommend it. I think it's a good read if anyone likes dark side stuff, political stuff, and all that type of thing.
no, it certainly is. Obviously, you already mentioned some things it pairs with nicely, but like sort of which other aspects of Star Wars canon do you feel it pairs with nicely? And if you didn't enjoy this book, what other Star Wars content should people consume?
I always recommend if you're into this type of period about around when the Death Star's being constructed and all that type of stuff, I really recommend the first Thrawn novel by obviously Timothy Zahn. You've obviously got Rogue One Catalyst, which obviously plays in with James Luceno. You've got Lords of the Sith, which is really good by Paul S. Kemp, which tells the story of Vader and the Emperor going to Ryloth and being the subject for like an assassination plot. Yeah, I think there's a lot of books around this period of time which are quite an interesting read. But yeah, they'd be the three I'd recommend: Catalyst, Lords of the Sith, and Thrawn.
And what about comics that ties into nicely? Obviously, you mentioned before the Darth Vader comic where it ties in with sort of the Vader and him hunting each other on that planet.
Yeah, that is, I believe, in the Charles Soule run of Darth Vader, and I believe I'm just getting the graphic novel out now. I'm just looking now. I think, yes, it is. It is. I'm just looking now. It is Darth Vader in the graphic novel. It's number 18. and it is on the Burning Seas graphic novel. The Darth Vader 18 is the issue that really plays into obviously Tarkin and Vader's relationship and Tarkin hunting Darth Vader at his request.
What's your thoughts on how this novel sort of ties together the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy?
I think it fits really well. I think it's quite a good bridge between obviously the prequel trilogy and our imperialization of the Star Wars galaxy, moving into obviously the original trilogy era. Yeah, I think it's a really good bridge. You take stuff from the Clone Wars and you mix it in with like the growing rebel threat. Yeah, I think it does do a great job of bridging the gap between the two eras of Star Wars.
It's just lovely because, the last scene from a dark side point of view in Revenge of the Sith is of course the Emperor and Vader looking out at sort of the very early beginnings of the Death Star construction. And obviously, I believe Tarkin's on that bridge of the Star Destroyer, so he's there and with them. And then in this book, these three characters interact quite well together, so that's very nice and makes subtle sense. And obviously, when we get to A New Hope, obviously, Tarkin's very much the Imperial boss on everything out to sea. Do you know what I mean? Vader's there being an enforcer, but Tarkin's pulling the strings, isn't he? Especially after the capture of Princess Leia, which I thought was done really, really well. Any closing thoughts about the book or any of the characters in it before we move on?
No closing thoughts. Like I said, I highly recommend to anyone who hasn't read the book. It's a good read. So yeah, no closing thoughts. But really interesting chat about the book. And like I said, it was interesting to go back over 10 years to see how the canon started and see obviously where we are now, where we have countless canon books. I can't even begin to count how many canon books we've got. But this was obviously the second in the line, which I really enjoyed. Yeah.
Awesome stuff. Right, Iain, that brings an end to an episode. We hope everybody listening enjoyed our deep dive of the Tarkin novel by James Luceno. It's obviously still available now, so go pick it up. I imagine it's still available as an ebook, still available as an audiobook. You can probably still buy it in paperback, but I also imagine you can probably pick it up on eBay or on Star Wars trading groups and places like that as well. Any last messages for the listeners, and where can people find you on social media?
The people can find me on social media at Star Wars Iain. I'm always happy to talk Star Wars with people and speculate. I do like a bit of fun speculation. It's great, obviously, to be back on the show and talk about something I'm quite passionate about, which is obviously Star Wars books. I do enjoy reading them, and I hope people have enjoyed our discussion today.
Would you be up for discussing deep diving some more novels?
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, we'll figure out what one we want to read next, and we'll do that. We'll do that after I read it.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Iain, thank you very much for being an absolute star. May the force be with you all. And remember, always tell that to Kanja Club.